And good morning to you.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Yeah. Boy, you guys just on cue there, huh? Well, here we are at the Mood House and starting out the year 2020. I've really enjoyed writing 2020.
Yeah. Nice to be, it's nice
I
to
guess
be,
I'm not the only one.
Nice to be in a decade you can say the 20s. The teens just never.
It never fit very well.
No.
You know, 2020 has a nice ring to it.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
It's a year of
So-
perfect vision.
Yeah.
You're-
Whoa. Well, we have a few corrections, but yeah. Well, we have completed the first 3 chapters of the Gospel of John, and this morning we're going to move right into chapter 4, 1 through 4. You guys are familiar with this story, women at the well, Jesus' encounter there in Samaria. But this morning we're just going to look at the first 4 verses, and I think we could just get right into it, and if somebody can read those first 4 verses, we'll get started.
Therefore, when the Lord knew that the Pharisees had heard that Jesus was making and baptizing more disciples than John, although Jesus himself was not baptizing, but his disciples were, he left Judea and went away again into Galilee, and he had to pass through Samaria.
Okay, thanks, Dave. So there is our text for this morning, and just to kind of get things going, we're going to work through the first 4 verses. So the first 3 verses, therefore, when the Lord knew that the Pharisees had heard that Jesus was making and baptizing more disciples than John, and then my comment in there, this is in my opinion, this is connecting back to verse 22 of chapter 3. And if somebody could get ready to read 3:22 through 30, I'll ask you to do that in just a moment. And then there's a parenthetic statement in there, and it's actually in the English version. It's actually scripted as a parenthetic statement. Although Jesus himself was not baptizing, but his disciples were. And you know, I've read sources of commentary on this, and there's all kinds of views about this whole thing. And then verse 3, he left Judea and went again into Galilee. So that's really the thrust of this. So I tend to think that in order to understand the first 3 chapters of the Gospel according to John, we really need to really understand the role of John the Baptist. If we were to go back now and read the first 3 chapters, John the Baptizer had a very significant role during the development of the first century. And there were a lot of questions. Who is John? And of course, the writer of John's Gospel, the apostle, he's pointing to the fact that this influential figure of the first century is pointing to Jesus as Messiah, as the Christ. And that is really a big thrust of the first 3 chapters. And it has bearing right here in this introduction to chapter 4. So if someone could read the reference back in 3:22 through 30, then I'll make some comments on this.
After this, Jesus and his disciples went into the Judean countryside and remained there with them and was baptizing. John also was baptizing at Aenon near Salem, because water was plentiful there, and people were coming and being baptized, for John had not yet been put in prison. Now discussion arose between some of John's disciples and a Jew over purification. And they came to John and said to him, Rabbi, he who was with you across the Jordan, to whom you bore witness, look, he is baptizing, and all are going to him. John answered, a person cannot receive even one thing unless it is given him from heaven. You yourselves bear me witness that I said, I am not the Christ, but I have been sent before him. The one who has the bride is the bridegroom. The friend of the bridegroom who stands and hears him rejoices greatly at the bridegroom's voice. Therefore this joy of mine is now complete. He must increase, but I must decrease.
Okay, good. Thank you. So these first three verses, I think were way more important to the first century readers than they are to us today. Because again, there was this question of who is John the Baptist, and I think the writer here, John, is making some accommodations to clarify to the first century readers what is going on. Verse 1, it's kind of interesting. Therefore, when the Lord knew, that the word Lord there is translated kurios in the Greek. It's interesting, some of your versions, I think whoever read, Dave read, I think some of the Greek texts say Jesus there. And so there's some controversy that even the Greek text couldn't really, when the translators, some chose the word kurios, some chose the word ethos for Jesus. So anyway, there's a lot going on here that really doesn't pertain to us today in our day and age. So this whole thing here, verses 1 through 3, John adds a P.S. to his completed thought in verse 36. This is my opinion. This postscript, P.S. stands for postscript. You know, this is a literary vehicle device that you and I have used probably several times in our lifetime, where we're writing a letter, and at the end I want them to remind them of this, and so you'll put, after your signature, you'll put P.S. Don't forget to bring the, whatever it is. And I think that if we look at verses 1 through 3 in this light, it just avoids a lot of needless discussion of what authorship and was this inserted later and these kinds of things that really don't pertain to the overall meaning of the book. But this brought clarity to the first century readers, and that's what this is designed in my way of thinking. That's what this whole thing is designed to do.
Mike?
Yeah.
Can you go back to that real quick?
Sure.
I'm not sure if this is another message coming out of that, but it was sort of this, it was implied here that Jesus heard, the Pharisees heard. Okay, so someone told, hey, the Pharisees heard about this baptism conflict or whatever. He withdrew, and it's like he's honoring John. He's getting out of there. He's going to let John, he's not going to compete with John.
That's really where we're going with our discussion. Yeah. So there's a lot more behind this that I'm not going to go into, that the commentators at the technical level are talking about, and it really doesn't pertain to us. So I wanted to start out, Bill, with just the overview. This is like, just look at this as a postscript, brought clarity to the first century readers. And so then we move on to verse 4. And here's verse 4. He had to pass through Samaria. So this is where we're really going to pick up the story. Now, Jesus and his disciples are down here in Judea, and this is where Jerusalem resides, right here. And he's going to go to Samaria on this news that Bill just spoke about. Now, we want to look briefly at the geography of this whole thing. For those of you who've been to Israel, you know that there's a backbone of mountains that runs north and south through here. And Jerusalem resides right on the backbone. And Jerusalem would be right in this area right here. And this is very mountainous through here. And to get from Judea to Galilee, there's actually two routes. And the first route would be down the Jericho Road, then up the Jordan Rift, because this is relatively flat, easy travel. and then to a place, you take a left turn, a place called Beit Shan, and then you go up into the valley, the Jezreel Valley, where Nazareth and where the Galilee is up in here. And that would be, that's a very used route. It's a very common route to use even today. Is going to go to Jerusalem, you could either go the Jordan Rift down to Jericho and then up, or you can go through the mountainous route here. And the point to know here is that, it just seems like, gee, it might be much easier just to go the direct route, but there's a lot of winding and moving and so forth here. On the other way, on the other side of things, there's only a few accesses down to the Jordan Rift in order to make that trip up, and the Jericho Road is the most direct route. So, for whatever reason, let me move on here. I think, you get into the commentaries and all that, and they go, well, Jesus had foreknowledge that he was going to meet the woman at the well, and, I'm not going to do all that. I think, I just said, what we know thus far, the Pharisees' engagement causes Jesus to make a move. That's what you were, it was that engagement, that reaction, that response from the Pharisees that causes Jesus to move away from Jerusalem to Galilee. There he is. He's moving away from Jerusalem, and that, and we do know from the story that there will be increasing resistance on the part of the Jewish officials. We do that, ultimately ending in the arrest and crucifixion. So we get back to this routing question. Here's, in my opinion, Jesus is moving away from Jerusalem at this time in response to the growing resistance to his ministry. I mean, that's kind of in my mind, that's the position I've taken. There are other positions out there. He probably chose the mountainous route just because it was a better option in regard to their point of origin. They're on foot. So that's why I think he, just for practical reasons, and went up there. So what I want to do is look at this morning this idea that Bill has introduced already, this idea of resistance. And so that's kind of where we're going to go in. We're going to go to table time, and we're going to talk about this idea of resistance. Resistance is something all around us. It's the physical property of resistance. When you and I make a movement in a certain direction, resistance is what we feel in regard, is the pushback in regard to that. That is true in the physical world. As we get into our car, the whole idea of average miles per gallon has everything to do with the weight of the vehicle, which is a property contributing to resistance. The resistance on the road surface, the mechanical resistances in the interconnecting systems within the vehicle, these are all contributing to that bottom line of your average mile, per gallon. And so they're in the physical world. We know, for those of you working on your vehicles, which is something I try to avoid, you have your hand on the wrench and you're just pushing and you're resisting, and all of a sudden that thing releases and you bust your knuckles against the thing. Well, there's the properties of resistance. Well, what is true in the physical realm is also true in the relational realm, in the spiritual realm, that we know what it's like to be resistance. We know that even though we may not be able to explain it, but in any human reaction, there's in a sense a dance going on, and in a sense we can feel things resistance-wise before we're able to articulate it. It's just something coming against resistance. Okay, so this is what is happening in this story. The news of the news got back to Jesus of the news receiving that the Pharisees received. For whatever reason, Jesus is responding to this resistance.
There's something that seems back in 3, this whole argument starts, it says, between John's disciples and some Jews, and they don't identify him. But whatever it was,
Yeah.
they somehow dragged Jesus into the argument.
Yeah.
And Jesus seems to be saying, I'm not going to get dragged into this argument.
Yeah, and so we're going to look at Jesus' response, you know, how he is responding to resistance. Okay, so regarding resistance, and this is going to have meaning in just a moment. So there's two directions we can move as you and I respond to this idea of resistance. This side would be on your left is what I would call engaging the resistance. And engagement, and starting at center line, it increases in intensity as you move to the left. And so engaging is one. This is going to be avoidance over here, the opposite of dealing with this property of resistance. So number one is in engaging, the first thing we might do if we're going to engage the resistance in a human interaction, we may question. We may just pose a question. That is an attempt to cause the other person to respond back. It's showing some level of going against what is being said. A question. Do you really think that way? It would be a simple. The next more intensified step in resistance would be to offer an opinion. And that is really dangerous in a marriage relationship. Offering an opinion would be, now I'm countering this, have you thought of this? And then the third step, there's all other kinds of words we could put in here, but the third step is face off, where we go toe to toe, and it usually leads to destructive kind of things. They've said when you fight fire with fire, all you get is more fire. So face off would be, and this is where this story is going to go. There's going to be a face off. It'd be interesting though to look at Jesus' response in light of the arrest and the trial and the crucifixion, but it's going to come to a head in this book. So on the other side of things is avoidance. Here is moving towards. Here is moving away. And avoidance, here's like the first step would be in a human interaction, no reaction. Someone says something, let's say it's a political statement regarding our current leadership or something like that. I'm feeling resistance, let's say, and I just don't respond. Just as a way to avoid further conflict or further resistance. So now I'm avoiding that. So another way that you guys have probably gotten really good at this, I have, is being able with our spouses kind of redirect the conversation, kind of do a verbal judo in the sense of try to not delve into it right there, but let's, could we talk about that later? But we've developed all kinds of interesting mechanisms to do a diversion around so we don't have to deal with this resistance at a given time. You know, if we can just put it aside, put it under the carpet, so we redirect the energy somewhere else. And then again, 3 on each side. It may get so bad that I've got to remove myself from the current location in order to just so I don't say something stupid. So relocation would be the ultimate on this side of avoidance. Face off, toe to toe is the ultimate conclusion on the engagement side. So I'm hoping I prompted your minds a little bit. This idea of resistance, it's a reality of life. And here we see in the story the now growing resistance from the religious group, the religious officials towards Jesus' ministry, and how Jesus now first responds to that in the story. And I'd like for us now to, we're going to move into table time and talk about this. Because I'm not looking for an either or. I'm looking for we want to talk about our experience with this idea of resistance. And so the question around the tables this morning will be, what has life taught you about engagement and avoidance in relation to resistance? And so let's, I'm going to stop the video. Let's talk about that, and then, we'll bring it back together, and we'll have a few minutes to kind of process it here at the end. So have some fun with this.